Deputy Speaker, I beg to move this House do now adjourn.
The question is that this House do now adjourn. Mr. Bernie Grant.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I say I'm pleased that my subject was chosen. This is a subject that has quite a lot of debate amongst sections of the community, particularly amongst black and minority ethnic people. And I think that it is time that the House heard and understood what is being said. And I welcome the opportunity of putting my case for the resettlement of people in the Caribbean to this House. Madam Deputy Speaker, in principle, there is nothing new about the British government providing financial assistance to people, including British citizens, who wish to resettle abroad. For many years, there have existed various schemes. Until 1988, for example, the old supplementary benefit system provided the full cost of fares for applicants and their dependents who wished to resettle abroad to do so. In August 1984, this scheme was in fact restricted so that only British citizens were entitled, and the maximum allowed per person was 2 years' worth of benefit. According to information provided in a parliamentary answer, between 1972 and 1986, some 1,208 people were assisted under this system at a total cost of £216,654. Since 1988, when supplementary benefit was abolished and replaced by the Social Fund, no equivalent provision has been available. Since 1971, however, there has also been very limited provision available under the Immigration Act of that year. I refer to the scheme run on behalf of the government by International Social Services and located in Brixton. I wonder why the government chose this particular location. This scheme provides for those who are not British citizens to obtain the cost of fares for themselves and their families, plus a small amount for the transportation of their effects. In total, between 1971 and 1995, some 2,545 people took advantage of this scheme. The overwhelming majority of them to return to the Caribbean region. The level of interest in this scheme is, however, far higher, with the number of initial inquiries reaching more than 900 in one particular year. I know from my own constituency casework that many of those who inquire are turned down because they are British citizens, and there is thus clearly a gap in provision. In addition to these schemes, there are others at the European level run by the International Organization for Migration, or the IOM. This organization facilitates return to the country of origin. The IOM's excellent program for the return and reintegration of qualified African nationals began in 1983, and more than 1,250 people have been assisted, with about a half of them coming from the United Kingdom. The project is now paid for by the European Union, and thus in part the British government, who support the project. The IOM has a major centre located in London. Phase 3 of the project began in January 1995. It will assist a further 999 professionals to return to targeted jobs in targeted countries or regions. It will pay their travel costs, the cost of professional equipment, and various reintegration allowances. Interestingly, The IOM also ran a program last year to assist 40 professionals to return to Jamaica, and 11 places were filled by UK applicants. A larger scheme with 50 places is likely to be run in 1996, and it is hoped to expand the scheme to the whole of the Caribbean in due course. I repeat that the government fully supports this scheme. I have been told today by the coordinator of the IOM, and I quote, this is what she said. I quote, "This program has aroused a great deal of interest, and from our conversations with applicants, we know that there are many who wish to return to Jamaica." She goes on to say, "We fully support your initiative," meaning my initiative, "in raising this issue, and we would be prepared to run a larger return program if funding was available." Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, it is now time, I believe, for there to be a thorough review of existing provision in this area and for a more realistic scheme to facilitate resettlement. It is my considered view that it would be in the interests of Britain, in the interests of the Caribbean, and most certainly in the interests of those who wish to resettle. There are, in other words, coinciding interests that would make such a scheme a logical development. I also believe that a suitable scheme could be developed at no additional cost to the public purse. There is no doubt that there is increased interest in resettlement. People have already left for the Caribbean in considerable numbers. There is a sizable drift back to the region of thousands of people. The Jamaican government estimates that some 2,000 people returned from the UK to Jamaica in 1994. Barbados, Dominica, Antigua, and Guyana are also popular destinations for returning residents. Organizations have been set up in Britain to assist those wishing to return, such as the Organization of Returning Jamaicans and Associates, and it is flourishing. And it is interesting that the person who heads up that organization, Mark Leban, said to me only yesterday that the management committee for ORAJ, as it is called, is made up of Jamaican people aged between 30 and 45. So that this is not a situation whereby only elderly people wish to return. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, those who have already resettled, including both those originally born in the region as well as those born in Britain. However, they are the more prosperous, the retired, or professionals with marketable skills. Also entrepreneurs who can afford the travel and resettlement costs involved. There are many others who would dearly wish to resettle, but who do not have the means to do so. I have had huge numbers of letters from such people, from all over the country, including my own constituents, who are desperately seeking help to return home. Many letters come too from those in the caring professions, seeking my help for their clients in this regard. They include the elderly, many of whom came here in the 1950s and 60s at the specific request of the British government and never intended to remain here for long. However, the streets of Britain turned out not to be paved with gold, and they were never in a position to return. There are others who are chronically ill and never likely to work again in Britain, who would prefer to return home to the Caribbean. Like the retired, they are frequently trapped by a benefit system which would cut them off from the benefits which they have earned if they were to go back. I have one constituent, for example, who is now retired and who longs to return to the Caribbean. If she did so, however, her state pension would be frozen at its current level, and all benefits for her dependent disabled daughter would be curtailed because they are only payable in Britain. Does anyone give a hoot, really, whether in a case of this kind, that young lady's benefit is paid here in Britain or in the Caribbean? The social security system is similarly inflexible so far as the long-term unemployed are concerned. I include here many single parents, people who know that they could advance themselves by returning to the Caribbean. However, they would find it hard to even raise the fare and would lose all benefits immediately if they left the United Kingdom. Given the high proportion of unemployed black workers who are long-term unemployed, some 60% as opposed to 44% in the white population, it makes little sense for the social security system to close off the option of return. It would not be so outrageous for such people, properly supervised, to be allowed benefit equivalent sums for a few months to enable them to explore this option. Far higher sums are already spent on make-work schemes here in Britain. Finally, there is another group which frequently approaches me. This comprises those who are in work, often skilled or professional people, who would like, at least for a period of time, to use their skills to assist in the development of countries with which they have connections, countries such as the Caribbean, with a view to resettlement. At present, there is no structure to channel the aspirations of this group, and there are many practical and financial obstacles. As I have already said, the Caribbean and possibly other interested countries would welcome a resettlement program. The region has for many years now been the subject of a brain drain in which its brightest and its best sons and daughters have migrated mostly to Britain, the United States, or Canada. The absence of these groups has a destabilizing effect on those countries and is now a major obstacle to economic development in the region. There are several Caribbean governments, including Jamaica and Barbados, which are encouraging people to return by making special arrangements to assist returnees. They have set up units within their foreign ministries to assist the smooth return of their citizens. They have also made tax changes favorable to returning residents and issued calls for nationals to return to those countries. They know there are major economic spin-offs resulting from resettlement. As I have said, a suitable scheme to assist in resettlement could be developed if there were the will to do so. Clearly, it would need to be the subject of detailed work, but it is possible to state the principles upon which such a scheme would be organized. Firstly, any scheme would of course be entirely voluntary, and there can be no question of compulsion or of rescinding any British citizenship. Secondly, it must be a responsible scheme, properly managed on a case-by-case basis, to ensure that those who return do so with the best possible advice and support. Thirdly, the scheme must be adequate, which will ensure that those who take advantage of it are properly provided for. I personally would not support any scheme which leaves people worse off than they are in the UK in terms of living standards, healthcare, housing in particular. Fourthly, the ultimate veto over eligibility for the scheme must rest with the designation countries themselves. In fact, they could well be given the responsibility for administering the scheme. I have had discussions with most of those governments, and they are willing to do so. Finally, the scheme would have to be developed in full consultation with the black community here, in particular the Caribbean community here, and the designation countries. The advantages to Britain of such a scheme would be numerous. First of all, it is not generally in the interest of any country to have a substantial number of people in its midst who honestly do not want to be in that country. Secondly, even with the most generous scheme, there would be substantial financial advantages. Those who approach me are all too often those who are most dependent on social benefits, health and welfare services, and indeed are most likely to be subsidized in various ways for their housing costs. They are also likely to be tenants of local authority housing. It would not take too much imagination to calculate a social benefits equivalent sum for a given number of people each year, which could be used as a basis for a budget for a resettlement scheme. Given the lower costs of living in the Caribbean, even after weekly benefit equivalent payments, there would be substantial sums available for investment in housing, social care, and health insurance. There are many variations possible. The existing IOM scheme could well be developed substantially to cater for more of those in work who wish to return. If the costs of this part of the scheme were to come from the existing ODA budget, this would not be a bad thing. It would certainly be a more effective means of helping the countries concerned than the current practice of sending down highly paid consultants to perform key jobs in those countries in the region. Finally, an enhanced resettlement program would be in the interest of Britain, not least because it comprise a recognition of the huge damage which Britain has inflicted on the Caribbean, both now and in the past. It is true to say that having created and exploited those countries through slavery and colonization, Britain is now abandoning them now that its economic interests lie elsewhere. Having stolen so much, it would be more than fitting at this time in history for Britain to at least facilitate the return of those who wish to go back to those countries. Some have said that even to mention this matter is to cause damage to race relations in this country, and to argue for a resettlement scheme is to give in to racism. I have even been accused of adopting the agenda of fascists and racists. Even the Secretary of State for Home Affairs told me recently that he feared that an enhanced settlement scheme would make black people feel unwelcome here. I find that very rich indeed, coming from someone who has set back race relations by at least 20 years in the relatively short time that he has been in office. I am not convinced by these arguments. This is about creating positive choices for black people, setting our own agenda for once, and about remembering where we came from. Some black people will want to stay in Britain, and the fight for racial equality will continue. I myself will continue to play my part in that struggle. It is true that some want to leave because they are sick and tired of the racism they face in this country. They are fed up with fighting racism, and I see no reason why they should be forced to do so. There are others, however, who honestly do not feel at home in Britain, and others who despair of the predominant values and culture of this society and fear for their children growing up in such a climate. Then there are others who simply wish to return to live with their families. And of course, this feeling is the more common nowadays because of the absurdity of current immigration rules, which keep families apart. And I wish the minister would address this particular point when he tries to sum up at the end of this debate. This House has no right to deny those people a choice about their future, and against the background of all that has been done to black people historically and is happening to black people at the present moment. Madam Deputy Speaker, we know of the tragic events that happened just not a week ago in Britain, where as a result of the tragic death, once again, the second in 6 months, of a black young person at the hands of the police in Brixton, where, as I understand it, the young man was cornered in a park. He had a knife. He threw it away. The police then descended on that young person and beat him very badly indeed. This was witnessed by several people, and I understand the PCA is now investigating it. Now, that is a tragic event by any stretch of the imagination. It is similar to what happened to Rodney King. And I'm sure the minister and some of the police officers around would have said that it is terrible what happened to Rodney King. It is my understanding, and there are witnesses who will come forward eventually to prove it, that this is precisely what happened to young Wayne Douglas in Brixton. And what concerns a number of people is that far from the police learning from their mistakes in the past, they refuse to do so. What they should have done is that they should have automatically suspended the officers concerned on full pay and had an inquiry immediately into the situation. I also have to say that the media played their part in this notorious affair, because the media should have given some prominence to yet another death at the hands of the same police force within 6 months, and by this use of side-handled batons. You know, Madam Deputy Speaker, these two young black males are the first people to die as a result of the introduction of the side-handled batons, which were imported from the United States, the same batons that killed Rodney King. And you know, Madam Deputy Speaker, we have heard nobody mention anything about this at all. I tried to ask a question of the Home Secretary on the occasion of the first death, and he gave me an answer to the effect that it cost too much to actually find out how many people had died as a result of the introduction of the long-handled batons. We now know, and I will tell this House, that 2 young black men have died as a result of these side-handled batons, and they are the first to die. I think that that in itself should require some statement from the Home Secretary, and maybe tonight the minister in this debate can address that particular point, but I doubt whether he will, because of course the minister himself is involved as a part of the race card that is currently being paid by the government in relation to all these matters. Most certainly.
I mean, on that point, I'm grateful to Honourable Friend for giving way. Wouldn't he agree that one of the most deplorable aspects of events in Brixton is far from the mainstream media looking at issues like the deaths in custody or the use of long-handled batons? They have sought scapegoats like Rudy Narayan or the Voice newspaper or the Caribbean Times newspaper. The ethnic press is being held up by the mainstream press for simply printing the facts when the mainstream press wouldn't. Wouldn't it be more appropriate if those same papers exposed some of the issues you've been talking about in relation to police brutality?
I'm indebted to my honourable friend, the member for Hackney North and Stoke Newington, for that intervention, because it was a point that I had missed, and I'm glad that she reminded me of it, because she, of course, is absolutely right. Because far from looking for the culprits who caused this situation to occur, they have looked for a whole number of scapegoats, including Rudy Narayan, who represents no one except himself, who is not a voice that people follow in Brixton, and poor Rudy is probably going to end up in the courts and so on and be charged for inciting riot, when if the truth were known, Rudy couldn't incite himself to riot on any occasion. And I think that this kind of scapegoating, this situation where the government and their cohorts are seeking to scapegoat people who are just trying to bring to the attention of the public a very serious situation within the black community, I think is deplorable. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, as I was saying, the House has no right to deny those people a choice about their future. And against the background that all has been done to black people historically and is happening currently, this House owes it to them to allow them to exercise that choice. I speak on behalf of a very large number of people in Britain in raising this matter tonight, and I hope that the Minister will carefully consider what I have said and agree that at the very least to commission a study of how the current very limited arrangements for resettlement could be suitably expanded. Madam Deputy Speaker, I will end my remarks there, and I will just say that I had a meeting with the Home Secretary and the Minister on this very point, and the Home Secretary felt that he couldn't support the scheme because, to put it in his words, that if he were to do so, it might encourage elements to believe that black people are not welcome in this country. The Home Secretary went on to say that black people are very welcome here, they are worthy people, they have made a substantial contribution to Britain. This was the first time that I've heard this particular Home Secretary make such remarks. I am very pleased, and I'm indebted indeed that the Home Secretary found it necessary to make those remarks. I wish he would say so more often, because most certainly, I'll give it to my honourable friend.
I'm grateful to honourable friend, but
The honourable lady gets launched. Could I remind her that she is addressing me?
I'm grateful to my honourable friend. Would my honourable friends agree that, welcome though it is to hear the Home Secretary say these positive things about race relations, it comes ill from somebody who is promoting the current asylum and immigration legislation, which is a profoundly racist set of legislation, which will tend to criminalise not just immigrants and asylum seekers, but criminalise black and ethnic people as a whole, particularly in relation to its provisions for passport checks on employers. And some might, I would not, but some might, accuse the Home Secretary of hypocrisy in this regard.
Yes, again, my honourable friend is on the mark. She is absolutely correct. Just today, of course, I was, and the Minister himself was and the Honourable Member for Hackery North and Stoke Newington. We were all in the committee, the first sitting of the committee, which will look at the Immigration and Asylum Bill. And quite frankly, I think that anyone who is who hasn't been nobbled by the Home Secretary and his people will see, any independent observer will look at this bill and say that this bill that has been put forward has clear racist motivations and motives. And the Immigration and Asylum Bill, in fact.
Sorry to interrupt the honourable gentleman, but the general burden of his adjournment debate is about people leaving this country, not coming to it. And I think he ought to return to that.
Of course, I'm always willing to take guidance from the Speaker. But of course, for some people to leave, they have to come into the country as well. So that I'm concerned with both people coming in and going out. You can't do one without the other. But I accept the point that the Madam Deputy Speaker has made. And the reason why I mentioned this bill is because, of course, this bill has a clear bearing on black and minority ethnic communities here. Because the Home Secretary will require employers to ask people to provide documents and so on in order to establish that they have a right to be in this country. And we know from experience that the people who will be asked will be black people. It happens all the time. It happens when black people go to Europe and go in a group of school children. And when the immigration officers in France and in Germany and in Belgium allow all the white children to go, they stop the black kids and ask for special, and the black kids have to produce or to explain, in effect, why they are able to walk through like everyone else. The minister might well poo-poo this, but if he poo-poos this, he shows that he is totally ignorant about the effects of his and the European Union's policies on black people who are here, who are British citizens. And if he's going to adopt this attitude of just saying that, oh, it's a load of nonsense, everything is rosy in Britain, and then I think that it exposes his own personal racism in relation to this matter. So I'm going to listen with clearly to what he has to say, because this is a reasoned argument that has been put forward. And he has a right, and I want him to address the points made.
I think perhaps the honourable gentleman didn't mean it, but he rather gave the impression that he was accusing another honourable member of racism, and that would definitely be unparliamentary.
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, I would withdraw any such remarks. Of course, the minister isn't racist. He might act as if he's a racist, but I know that he isn't. And that is on that basis I will withdraw the remark and give it to my honourable friend.
The honourable gentleman. And I think the whole House is following his arguments very carefully indeed. Does he not agree that even at this late stage, bearing in mind all the matters that have been raised at today's lobby of the asylum bill, which took place in this House today, Madam Deputy